Max's Kansas City, that whole 70s post factory kind of world in New York City is, for a lot of people, including myself, almost like a fantasy world where it seemed like everything was exciting, creativity was at a high, everyone was encouraging to each other. Jealousy didn't exist maybe, it was just about, let's just push everyone forward and let's be original because we're in New York. So what is your take on that era, because you were there as a kid?
Well, first of all, I have to immediately throw in that my mom used to hang out at the factory and was a big part of that whole scene. And, you know, people always ask me, how did I wind up at clubs and going to shows so young? Because obviously, you know, anybody who knows who I am has seen the pictures. I'm like 10, 11, 12, and I'm at all these places that really no child should ever have been anywhere near. But that's kind of how, ultimately, how I wound up involved with all those places, is because, you know, my mom was a part of that scene. She's actually the reason that Andy Warhol wound up seeing the Velvet Underground. And, you know, she was friends with a lot of pretty influential and heavy people of the time, you know. And my folks met at a Harry Smith party at the Chelsea Hotel. So it's like, you know, I've pretty much been, you know, I was conceived into it, literally.
Were there any other kids? Any peers that you could relate to at all, or?
Hell no.
The closest were the 20-year-olds and 20
There was one kid who was a few years older than me. Well, like the Blessed were only a few years older than me. Howie Pyro, I don't know how many years older than me he was, like maybe 4 or 5 years. And, you know, that's a big deal when you're 12. But like there was like one other kid who was, again, like 3 or 4 years older than me. So he was like 16 or whatever the fuck. And I remember he used to be the cool kid on scene, and he was kind of annoyed when I all of a sudden was younger and in a band, and so I was a little cooler, you know. So it's like we didn't even make friends really. He kind of, you know, I hung out with all adults, man. And it was like weird because, you know, I mean, I was like the only kid in class who would miss school because I had gigs on the weekend. You know, to other kids in 5th grade and shit, you know. What do you mean you had a concert at a club? Like, it was like alien. And I remember I actually went to school with Huey Morgan from the Fun Loving Criminals, and I remember him being like, you know, what are you talking about? You did a show, you know? And years later, he's telling me, man, I always thought that shit was so crazy. Like, you were out doing shows, and we're like, what the fuck? You know? I mean, you know, I got a fucking real, I got a lot of baggage because of that shit, man. I don't, as much as people try to romanticize it, you know, I'm really glad I had the majority of the experiences I had and witnessed the things I saw, but I wouldn't fucking put any kid in any of those environments or around any of those fucking scumbags. I mean, everybody was like a fucking, with the exception of very few people, everybody was completely fucking fucked up. A lot of shit happened to me that, you know, wasn't exactly cool. And, you know, so by the time I came to my early teens, I was a fucking mess. And you could ask anybody in the New York hardcore days, I was probably one of the scariest motherfuckers you'd ever meet. You know, all those early hardcore kids were fucking scared shitless of me because I was living a really crazy life, like before they fucking knew what the fuck was going on. And I grew up in an all Puerto Rican neighborhood where I used to have to fucking fight breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So by the time all these fucking hardcore kids start coming in from Queens and the suburbs of Connecticut or wherever the fuck they were coming from, I was a fucking terrifying motherfucker then because, you know, not only would I fuck them up, you know, but, you know.
How much did you...
I don't want to say I was realer, but I was realer.
How much did you lean into that, and how much did you love that? The image of you, this idea of you.
I didn't love anything. It's just who the fuck I was. I didn't have that same perception of me that other people have of me. I'm just me. And you look at me fucking wrong or look at me too long, and I'm going to fucking fuck you up. And everybody knew it. Even my friends, you know? So again,
You don't feel bad about your friends feeling that way?
I fucking can't help that. I mean, it's a little odd in hindsight now. I didn't know it till years later, till they had the courage to fucking tell me.
That goes back to people looking out for you and being honest with you and trying to steer you in a direction. Everyone was just out for themselves.
Well, I think the hardcore kids were, at that point in time, most of them, again, they were like, who the fuck was going to tell me some shit like that? Ain't nobody had the fucking, wasn't nobody going to tell me shit. And in the early days of those punk days and shit, yeah, man, everybody was kind of lost in the sauce, And then sadly what happened is you wound up having a lot of these fucking, wannabes who started like trying to emulate all the things about how I was expressing myself, which were not cool necessarily. I mean, like I said, I was a pretty violent person in my youth, and that caused a lot of kids on the scene to like form their own little groups that tried to impose their fear and violence on others and shit. And it really I have more regrets about that shit, being a fucking, I understand why I was a maniac when I was young. I completely understand. I've had to, go to therapy and shit over it. I get it. Doesn't make me feel good about it, but, it is what it is. But it's like, when you are kind of the cause for a lot of other people's behavior. I mean, but at the end of the day, everybody's got to own their own shit. You can't say, oh, I did this because such and such was an influence on me. Well, no, motherfucker, you did it because you did it. Whether you were influenced by them or not, you got to fucking be responsible for your shit. So, But I tell you this about Max's, because we were talking about Max's. Well, I always kind of liked Max's better than CB's in those early days. I got to tell you.
Yeah.
And I grew to love CB's more. But in the early days, first of all, CB's was on the Bowery. So it was just fucking scummy as fuck down there. It was like the fucking, it was literally Skid Row. You had to walk from fucking, like many, many, many blocks of just bums and junkies and total scumbags. And then they had the halfway house right next door. So there was always a fucking army of fucking derelicts right in front. I mean, that just gives you an idea of what that fucking block was like. Whereas Max's was above 14th Street. It was like, and that was kind of the first border. Like above 14th Street, things started to get a little nicer. And I think it was around 20th or 21st Street or some shit like that, right by Union Square Park, which was like a major drug park at the time. But again, it was further up, so it wasn't nearly as fucking scummy as it was further down where I lived or where CB's was. And also, Max's paid better. And it's funny because of course, I didn't realize, then that, they were doing all the, manufacturing of the money themselves. But, you always knew Max's, there was some gangster shit going on. There was definitely always some mafia shit there. That was obvious. And, but it was, CB's was like a fucking rundown fucking kind of shithole. Even when it had the movie seats all the way up to the stage, it was still a rundown shithole in a fucking rundown area. Max's had the restaurant downstairs. It had the staircase that led up to the club where the bands played. So it was like more of a,
What are some shows that stand out from Max's that you saw? Because you probably saw some legendary bands.
Oh, man, I saw so many fucking things there that were just ridiculous. But I mean, and also people should know that, fucking everybody played there. I mean, fuck punk rock and hardcore or whatever. Well, hardcore wasn't even a thing yet, but fucking Bob Marley and the Wailers played there, opening up for fucking like Bruce Springsteen or some shit. I mean, like literally every artist you can think of. I think AC/DC fucking played there or some shit. I don't know, but like Lemmy wanted Motorhead to play there, but they never got a chance. But it was just like, but I gotta say, it was, besides playing there with the Stimulators, which meant a lot to me, I think the thing that stood out the most was seeing the Bad Brains there. People were still playing punk rock. It was still like, they were like, I was like, whoa, fucking here comes the train, motherfucker, get out of the way, you about to get run the fuck down. This motherfucker doing backflips and shit. We're like, what?
Was Earl influence on
Are you
Because
crazy?
you played
Shit,
drums.
was fire and influence on food, you know?
For those who don't know, Harley played drums.
Yeah, that's how that's, kind of why I play bass the way I play. And I'm still a drummer. I play drums on bass now. That's all. That's why I'm more like punchy than a lot of, I'm more like, and I really got that shit from Daryl too. Like Daryl was one of the people that, is one of the reasons why I ultimately wound up switching from drums to bass. And, but yeah, I gotta say that the Bad Brains were one of them.
Did you talk to him about bass or anyone else about bass?
He gave me the only real bass lessons. Him and Lemmy, the only two people that I ever got any actual lessons from. And I didn't get like many lessons, but like Daryl, I used to hang and jam with Daryl like all the time. Sometimes I'd be playing drums and he'd be playing bass at me and explaining stuff to me while he'd be playing it. And yeah, I have some great memories of that, man. Yeah.
So you had some musical kind of role models or people that were looking at
Oh, yeah. No, the Bad Brains probably are the only people that if I could look back that had some sort of positive influence. I mean, obviously my aunt did too. She taught me a lot about music and really taught me how to be a band leader, and
And Lemmy.
Lemmy gave me the only other real bass lesson I ever had, and he was definitely a huge influence on me, not just as a musician, but as a person. I was lucky enough to do a lot of shows with Motorhead over the years. I saw their first New York show ever at Irving Plaza with Daryl. And yeah, man, he was a huge influence on me. And one thing he said to me, I quote this one all the time. I was getting a little frustrated for a while, as all musicians do on tour, and just dealing with the life and the fans and this and that. And I'm just like, how the fuck do you deal with this shit, man? You've been doing this shit longer than fucking anybody. Here I'm like in my teens. I'm like, how the fuck you deal with this shit after all these years, all this bullshit? And by the time he looks at me, and he knew I was a vegetarian, ironically. So he said, what'd you rather be doing, slicing bacon for a living? And I was like,